Continental Airlines Flight 11. The tragic story of 1962. In the world of aviation, some tragedies are remembered. But long before black boxes, security checkpoints, and federal air marshals, there was another flight, one most people have never heard of. A commercial airliner torn apart in the night sky, not by accident, not by storm, but by something darker. The year was 1962. The plane, Continental Airlines Flight 11. The route? Chicago to Los Angeles. And on board, a man with a briefcase, a quiet smile, and a secret that would unravel midair. This is not just a story about a flight that never made it. It's about what happens when desperation takes to the sky. On May 22nd, 1962, the skies above Unionville, Missouri were quiet, peaceful. The kind of night that puts farm dogs to sleep and lulls small-town America into stillness. But at 9:17 p.m., the silence shattered. A flash, a sound, something unnatural ruptured the calm air. A body, limp and alone, plummeted from 39,000 feet, trailing black smoke and scattered dreams. The man fell through the night like a broken angel. And somewhere across that Midwestern silence, 44 others had already gone. This was the last flight of Continental Airlines Flight 11, a D-7 airliner bound for Los Angeles that would never arrive. Continental Airlines Flight 11 stood ready. 45 people boarded, each with stories, dreams, and burdens they carried in silence. But for 45 passengers and crew, it was the last full day they'd ever see. Among them, a mother and daughter on their way to the holiday land, a businessman returning to his family, a young Navy man heading west, and a quiet, unremarkable man named Thomas G. Doty. Each with luggage, each with plans, each unknowingly walking toward a ticket they would never use again. Among the passengers, a man named Thomas Doty. Quiet, isolated. In his pocket, a one-way ticket and multiple insurance policies bought just minutes earlier. Doty had arrived at the airport alone. No suitcase, only a briefcase carefully held, never placed on the floor. He wore a beige jacket, dark pants, and shoes so polished they reflected the terminal lights. At the airport newsstand, Doty paused, not for candy, not for a paper, but for the vending machine, the kind that sold flight insurance. 4 policies, all in his name, all payable to his wife. It was legal, it was common, and in that era, it was deadly. Flight 11 wasn't supposed to be that flight. Doty had originally booked a different flight to Kansas City, but he changed it at the last moment, upgraded, chose a faster route. Flight 11 was a DC-7B, a 4-engine propliner known for its range and reliability. The aircraft had flown thousands of hours, its crew experienced, its history clean. At Gate 15, passengers began boarding at 8:15 p.m. Captain Fred Gray, age 42, led the flight crew. Co-pilot Edward Sullivan, 29, was quiet but capable.
Stewardess Mary Mahoney greeted each passenger with calm Midwestern poise. Doty boarded last, seat 17E. He smiled politely, said nothing, clutched the briefcase a little tighter as he stepped through the doorway. At 8:31 p.m., Continental Airlines Flight 11 began taxiing down the runway at O'Hare International Airport. Its destination, Los Angeles, with a scheduled stop in Kansas City. Inside, the passengers settled into the plush blue seats. Newspapers opened, magazines flipped. Children whispered questions about clouds. Thomas Doty sat upright, eyes forward, the briefcase still at his feet, locked. Inside, something far more than just clothes or documents. He had not come for the view. He had come to die, and to take everyone with him. At 8:38 p.m., Flight 11 lifted from the runway, climbing, rising, heading west toward darkness.
The cabin of Flight 11 was quiet, peaceful. Passengers had begun to relax. Stewardess Mary Mahoney moved with practiced grace down the aisle, offering drinks and small meals. Her smile never wavered, even for the most nervous flyers. Captain Gray and First Officer Sullivan communicated with Kansas City Center. Smooth air ahead, clear skies. In row 17, Thomas Doty appeared calm. He didn't ask for a drink, didn't speak to anyone, just sat, hands on his lap, his briefcase at his feet. No one knew. Not the pilots, not the crew, not the families 2 rows behind him, that a bomb rested only inches from his shoes. Row 17 was nearly full. To Doty's left, a man named Joseph Cernick, age 33, a steel worker from Chicago, headed to California. Behind him, Mrs. Helen S. Nelson and her teenage daughter, laughing over a travel brochure. 3 seats up, Father Robert E. Kearns, a Catholic priest returning from a retreat. The rest of the plane held people like them, ordinary, human, living. Each one with a story, each one unknowingly sharing their last night on Earth. At 8:59 p.m., Flight 11 reached cruising altitude, 39,000 feet. The cabin lights dimmed, the sky outside, pitch black, stars scattered in every direction. Captain Gray made a short announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude. Weather in Kansas City is clear. We'll be arriving in approximately 45 minutes. In row 4, a young boy looked out the window and whispered, "We're above the moon." Somewhere over Iowa, a radio technician at air traffic control marked the plane's blip on his screen, unaware it would vanish within an hour. 9:10 p.m. The aircraft glided over northern Missouri. Thomas Doty looked out his window. No clouds, no turbulence, just dark emptiness. He reached down, slowly, opened the locks on the briefcase. Inside, a homemade bomb, dynamite, wire, a simple barometric trigger, one that would activate with altitude beyond the control of anyone on board. At 9:14 p.m., he set it, quietly closed the case, sat back, and waited. The passengers continued as if life was still promised. A man snored quietly near the emergency exit. A mother tucked a blanket around her child. In the cockpit, Captain Gray reached for his logbook. "3 minutes. That's all that remained. Somewhere in the fuselage, a mechanism clicked. A delay, a spark. Then 9:17 p.m. In an instant, the tail section of Flight 11 was torn from the aircraft. The bomb had detonated near the rear lavatory, exactly where Doty had placed his briefcase. The pressure dropped, the fuselage cracked, and the plane began to fall apart in midair. At precisely 9:17 p.m., the silence of the sky was torn apart. The blast originated near the rear lavatory, directly above the aft baggage compartment. The bomb's power wasn't massive by military standards, but at 39,000 feet, pressure is everything. The tail section of the DC-7 sheared off instantly. The aircraft's skin peeled open like paper. Rows of seats detached, windows blew out, and in that moment, the oxygen masks never had a chance to fall. There were no Mayday calls, no black box warnings. Flight 11 did not go down, it came apart. Bits of fuselage rained from the stars, burned insulation, seat cushions, photographs, shoe soles, all scattered across the black sky. Some bodies fell whole, others torn midair, limbs separated by velocity and wind shear. Eyewitnesses on the ground would later report a fiery object tumbling silently through the night. They assumed it was a meteor. It wasn't. One body, Thomas Doty's, was found far from the others, unburned, intact. He had been ejected early, flung out before the worst of the fire took hold. His briefcase was never found. 9:30 p.m., rural Missouri. In the town of Unionville, locals sat on porches, sipping tea, listening to distant AM radios. Then came a boom. A low, thunderous sound that made windows rattle. Some thought it was an earthquake. Others believed the grain silos had exploded. But above them, scattered across miles of farmland, flaming pieces of Flight 11 were falling. In the darkness, death was arriving in silence. Just past 9:40 p.m., local farmer George Bragg saw something burning in his north pasture. He grabbed a flashlight, called the sheriff. What he found made his knees buckle. Rows of torn metal, scorched grass, a row of airplane seats with passengers still buckled in, lifeless. One man, arms raised, as if still bracing for impact. Nearby, a child's shoe, a stewardess's name tag, fragments of a gold wedding band. Over the next hour, Emergency calls flooded from farms in 5 different counties, but there were no survivors to save. The Putnam County Sheriff's Office responded first, then state troopers, then military personnel from nearby Kirksville. By midnight, the crash zone was declared federal. But there was no crash site, only crash fields, 6 in total, covering nearly 8 square miles. Wreckage had landed in pastures, trees, chicken coops, and ponds. Bodies were recovered from ditches, roofs, and even inside barns. Investigators quickly realized this was not engine failure. This was not turbulence. This was deliberate.
By sunrise, the crash zone had become a maze of yellow tape and camera flashes. Investigators from the Civil Aeronautics Board, FBI, and local law enforcement began cataloging debris. They found twisted seat frames embedded in the dirt, a child's drawing folded neatly inside a coat pocket, fragments of engine cowling charred beyond recognition. But most disturbing was the pattern. The aircraft had not descended in one piece. It had disintegrated in the sky. There were no signs of fire before the breakup, no warnings from the cockpit, no distress call. It pointed to only one conclusion: an explosion. Investigators began the grim task of identifying the dead. Some were recognizable, others were not. They relied on wallet IDs, dental records, fingerprints. In some cases, only jewelry remained. A tiny ring engraved with initials. A rosary fused to melted fabric. A child's suitcase. Its name tag still legible. Jill, age 9. Every item told a story, and every story ended the same way. Among the wreckage, one body drew immediate attention. It was found nearly a mile away from the main debris field, unburned, unbroken, intact. Thomas Doty. His seatbelt had never been fastened. His briefcase? Gone. The location of his body, separated from others by a great distance, suggested one thing. He had been blown out of the plane before its final disintegration. And he wasn't traveling light. In his jacket were 4 separate flight insurance policies, each signed, dated, and purchased less than an hour before takeoff. Who was Thomas Doty? Thomas Gene Doty was 34 years old, a former military man, a quiet insurance agent from Kansas City. Divorced, deeply in debt, recently laid off. He had one child, a son, age 6. He also had a $300,000 motive: in-flight insurance money. He had purchased 4 separate policies in vending machines before boarding. Total value? More than a lifetime of earnings. He mailed letters to his ex-wife earlier that day. One of them contained a will. The other, a note. It read, "By the time you read this, I'll be gone, but you won't have to worry about money anymore." Back in 1962, it was common for airports to have flight insurance vending machines. For as little as $2, passengers could purchase life coverage before boarding, no questions asked. And that's exactly what Doty did. What he didn't anticipate was the national outrage that would follow. 44 innocent people had died for a payout. A family was shattered in the name of financial security, and a hole had been blown in the heart of American air safety. This was not just an act of murder. It was economic suicide turned mass homicide.
The tragedy of Flight 11 exposed a darker undercurrent in American aviation. It wasn't the first time someone had used an airplane to commit insurance fraud. Between 1958 and 1962, there were 4 other known cases of passengers using flight insurance to mask suicide as disaster. But Dowdy's act was different. He took 44 others with him. In the months that followed, airport vending machines offering instant life coverage were quietly removed. Regulations changed. Background checks became tighter. The price of life insurance in terminals tripled. But for 45 families, it was already too late. Thomas Dowdy said he did it for his family. But what did his son gain? A father who vanished in smoke? A name blackened in every newspaper? And the weight of growing up as the bomber's boy? He never received the money. The insurance companies denied all claims on grounds of criminal act. The family was left with nothing but grief and a shadow that followed them for decades. Sometimes the worst wounds aren't visible in wreckage. They live in the silence left behind. The funerals were held quickly. Many bodies were buried in closed caskets. Some never identified at all. In Kansas City, a priest spoke of forgiveness. In Chicago, a protester held a sign, "Flight insurance killed my brother." Behind closed doors, Dowdy's wife refused to speak publicly. His military record was sealed, and the FBI quietly closed the case with 2 words: suicide bombing. But for the families, no closure came. Only headlines, lawsuits, and empty seats at dinner tables. Flight 11 changed aviation forever. It marked the first known case of a commercial aircraft being destroyed by a passenger-initiated explosive device in the United States. It sparked reforms in aviation insurance, security protocols, passenger screening. But most of all, it reminded the world that air travel, for all its promises, was never immune to human desperation. They found his body a day later, face up in a quiet field. Eyes closed, hands still at his sides. Thomas Dowdy had no wounds, no burns, only one broken arm. He fell from the sky as if laid gently by something far greater than gravity. Was it guilt? Cowardice? Or a belief that this final act was a gift? We may never know what truly passed through his mind in that moment before he opened the briefcase. But what followed was unforgivable.